Chapter 3, Exploring Linux File Systems. Alrighty, so the first half of this chapter, we went in and we introduced the Linux file system, the types of file systems, the directory structure, and we went in and took a look at files. Really, all kinds of files, right? We looked at binary files and executable files, but we placed a special emphasis on text files, specifically plain text files. These are files with just plain ASCII text inside of them. No formatting data, no metadata, none of that. And we looked at a few commands to crack open these text files and see what's inside them. Right? So I could cat a file and look at the inside of it. I could do a less on it. I could do a more on it. I could even display the contents backwards. Right? But all these tools simply allow us to view the contents of a text file. It doesn't let us edit them. In order to edit them, we need a specialized tool, a program, called a text editor. Well, why a text editor? Well, I can't use a word processor like Microsoft Word, for example, to create my text files because it embeds hidden information in there. We spend a lot of time in these text files in a Linux system because, I mean, check out the etc folder here. Right? Look at these .conf, fuse.conf, files like the fstab, ntp.conf. These are all straight text files that control how the operating system operates and how programs within the operating system operate. As an admin, we're going to spend a lot of time manipulating these text files. Now in the Windows world, if you want to crack open a text file, you do it in a nice little app called Notepad. All right? This is our Windows text editor, and it's been around, I don't know, since the Windows 3.0 days, if not earlier. We're talking like 27 years. And it totally works. This is my text file. No bells or whistles, right? I got to little pull down menus here to save stuff, open stuff. I can undo, right? And that's pretty much about it. It would be awesome if I had something like this in the Linux world. Well, actually, I do, right? And the different GUIs have different editors. Here in Genome, if I go under Application and Accessories, I have an editor right here called gedit. Right? You click on that, and it brings up this. And it looks an awful lot like that Windows Notepad. And actually, it's Windows Notepad on steroids. It does everything that the Windows app does, but it's got other little features like tabbed browsing. Look at that. I can open up multiple documents at one time and tab in between them. It has little buttons on here. It even has syntax highlighting. So let's say I am making just plain text. I'll say don't highlight anything, but maybe I'm writing a web page. Right? This is my HTML code, and I'm putting up my new web presence. Well, I can tell gedit that, hey, this is an HTML document, and it does syntax highlighting. It lights up my tabs, my various tags. And I can do the same for all kinds of markup languages. Look at this. Come on. All these scientific scripting languages, MATLAB, shell scripting, everything from DOS batch files to shell scripts to Python, all that kind of stuff. I can even get my C programming on with this. Really useful and a very nice little tool. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is this tool requires a GUI. It requires this. But the majority of time, we're probably not going to have a GUI. If you're working on a production server, especially something that's like an application server or a web server or something like that, the odds are very strong you won't have a GUI by design for security measures, right? All you got to have is a command line environment. So what I really need is a good full-featured editor that can work in the CLI. Well, fortunately, I've got one. And I have several to pick from, really. We have ones like called Emacs, which do this. And same idea. It's a program. I can run it from the CLI. It has various windowing features, text highlighting, all this fancy stuff. I can save it to PDF formats, you name it. Problem is, not every Linux distro is going to have Emacs or Nano or any of the other more common text editors. As we've seen previously, there are hundreds of distros out there, and within the distros, they vary widely depending on what software packages were installed, either at installation or post-installation. However, there is one editor that exists pretty much in every distro, at least every Linux distro I've ever seen, and it's called Vim. Now, Vim has been around for a while. So we need to kind of talk about why it is the way it is. As we go in and start learning this, and the reason we're learning this is, again, it works from the CLI. I can use this from a console, from a secure shell session, whatever. And 99% of the time, any Linux or Unix installation you're on is going to have this editor. But it does things in a very arcane way, if you will. You got to go through and learn these commands, and you got to be like, why do they do it this way? Why are they trying to confuse me? Well, it's not trying to confuse you. It's the idea that this has been around for a very long time, and it kind of shows its age. Let's see where it really came from. Originally, when Unix was first put together, actually back in the late 60s, it came with an editor. And it was an editor called Ed, which stood for editor. They weren't terribly imaginative, I know. But you got to think about this. These were mini computers, right? And what were their input devices like? These teletypes, right? You'd have this typewriter-looking piece of equipment with a continuous scroll of paper coming out of it, and you, as the operator or the IT person, would be banging away on this keyboard right here, looking at one line at a time. Well, the early versions of Unix had text files to edit. So Ed was written for this environment you see right here. Basically, you would look at your file one line at a time, and you had a very limited number of keys to work with. I mean, really, the keyboard of that period kind of looked like this. Right? This is like, what, 50 keys? Notice what's missing. No Alt key, no F key, no function keys, no arrow keys. These keys have arrows drawn on them, but they're not arrow keys per se. More on that later. This was the tools that they had to work with. So the Ed editor was written to make use of what keys they had available. And as a result, we ended up with a lot of commands that were invoked by single letters. So commands like Q to quit and W to save your changes and so forth. Well, let's fast forward in time a little bit. By the early 1970s, these teletypes were starting to be replaced, and they're actually being replaced with real computer monitors. They were CRTs, but they were monitors. They could display an entire page of text at one time right on the screen. And while Ed worked great for this kind of environment, it wasn't quite so hot for a full screen environment. So it had to evolve. And it did. By the early 70s, Ed became an editor called VI. And that stood for Visual Editor. This is an updated version of this. It's a visual editor. Literally, it means it's a full screen editor. You can look at a whole page of text on the screen. And at the time, that was groundbreaking. But it's the descendant of ed. So VI inherited all of ed's commands, right? All these commands are originally set up to work in this limited keyboard environment on a teletype, now brought forward into a full screen editor. VI has became the standard editor in pretty much every Unix distro all the way through the 70s and 80s. And it's still there even today. Proprietary Unixes like Solaris and HP-UX absolutely still use VI. Well, Linux came around. Early 1990s, right? Linux, open source. Proprietary Unix, closed source. So the actual VI code is closed source. Just like the rest of Linux, though, the early developers of it looked at VI, decided they wanted to have a version of VI for Linux, and they reverse engineered it. They went in and looked at what VI did, and they created a new program that looks just like it, but it's open source. And they called this product Vim. This stands for VI Improved. I know, really cute on the acronyms, but there it is. Vim has the same command set as VI, but it's not a descendant of VI. It's more like a second cousin twice removed. Right? It actually doesn't share any of the original source code with VI. It just looks a lot like it. Well, Vim was meant to be backwards compatible, meaning if you knew VI, you would know Vim. The commands that began back in ed that carried forward into VI, again carried forward into Vim. But on top of that, the developers, here's the improved part, made it better. They added different command sets. They added features that we would expect in a more modern text editor. And actually, Vim can do things like the text highlighting and syntax highlighting and all that kind of stuff. But at its core, it still has the original VI command set. Now, Vim is not a simple editor to use. Here's a book put out by O'Reilly Press, and they're famous for putting out Unix, especially Unix sysadmin books. And look at this thing right here. This thing has almost 500 pages, right? Just on how to use the Vim editor. So there's a lot going on here. You can definitely get pretty in depth. You can even go out to the Vim's development site, download the code, download the source code, do whatever you want with it. The nice thing about it is Vim has been a standard editor in every distro of Linux for decades, and it probably will be. So if you understand a basic skill set of Vim, and I'm not talking about all the advanced stuff, I'm talking about the half dozen or so commands that you need to just to do basic text file editing, I can't really think of a Linux system you're going to run into that you're not going to be able to get in and get your job done if it involves editing text files. So what does it look like? What's this Vim thing all about? Well, it's invoked with the command Vim, right? If I hit just enter right now, it'll open up a blank Vim session. It's basically just an empty file. I'll have to name that file from within Vim, save it, whatever. Usually what we do is we Vim and then the name of a file I want to open. Well, as you can see, in my home directory, I already had a file 1. So let's go ahead and create a file 2. And I can do that with Vim file 2. Behold, the full text editor. This is it. You're looking at it, right? These pull-down windows here, this is for the terminal window, not for the editor. You know you're in Vim when you see this little line of tildes off to the left, right? And that's pretty much about it. I got a little thing down here telling me what my file name is. Hey, you called this file 2. It's a new file, meaning it hasn't been saved yet. And that's pretty much about it. Down here I have some cursor positioning information. And so you're like, cool, now what? Well, basic thing about Vim. It has 2 modes in it. it has what's known as a command mode and a data entry mode. And if you think about it, Notepad did also, right? Down here is my data entry area, right? I can type everything down I want down here. And up here on my pull-down menus are my commands. Save, open, quit, that kind of stuff. Remember, Vim is meant to be used on a CLI. It has no pull-down menus. It has nothing. So we have to make use of that keyboard to represent everything. So when I first go into Vim, I'm in command mode natively. And you'll get used to it here as you go through. When you see this output, this display here at the bottom, you're in command mode. There's several different ways of going into data entry mode. Let's look at one called the insert mode, where I go over and I hit I on the keyboard. Let me click in there. Maybe that'll work better. There we go. I hit the I key on my keyboard. Now look what happened. I'm in insert mode. Now I can type data. This is my even more awesome text file. And I can obviously misspell things, as you see right here. Spell check is off. Just kidding. There is no spell check in Vim. Didn't have it back in the 60s. And from here, it acts like any other text editor. Well, when I'm in text entry mode, I can't issue commands. But what if I want to save this? Let's say I'm done with my text file. Well, I have to get out of data entry mode. And you do that by hitting the escape key. Notice the insert mode went away. Now I'm just back in command mode. So here's one of those things. 90% of the commands in Vim you invoke using a colon. Just like that. Notice down here at the bottom of the screen. Most of my commands, at least the ones we care about, are a single letter. So if I wanted to save the changes to this file, if I wanted to save file 1, I'd do a :W. If I wanted to quit the text editor, maybe I started this and I'm like, you know what, I messed up. I'm just going to blow it away and start over. I could do Q to quit out of it. Now, Vim's not that archaic. If I try to quit out of this, it'll know that, hey, you didn't save your file, and it'll throw up a little warning going, you're about to quit without saving your file. Do you want to save it? Maybe I don't want it to do that. Maybe I just want the editor to do what I tell it to do and to basically shut up, to stop reminding me, stop nagging me. Well, if I do Q exclamation point, that just quits the editor with no warnings. Right? Just do it, force it, and that's the end of it. I can also stack my commands. So maybe I want to save my changes and quit. :W, Q, and let's do an exclamation point just so to make sure we don't get any confirmation messages. All right? Hit enter, and there we go. Now if I do a listing, check it out. I got a file 2. And if I do a cat on my file 2, there's the data that I just typed into it. So there is quite a bit going on with Vim. Again, this is a very full-featured text editor. I don't expect us to learn all of it. I've been doing in this line of work for 31 years. I don't know all the Vim command syntaxes. It can do a lot of things. But if we can learn a basic set of them, we'll be able to get our jobs done. Fortunately, most Linux distros, especially Red Hat, come with a cute little utility called Vim Tutor. And you just type it like so. Notice there's no space. It's just one word, Vim Tutor. And if I hit enter, I'm presented with this. Now, what is this really? This is nothing but a text file opened inside of Vim. That's all that it is, right? And I go through here in the front, and I go through the intro, down, down, down. and I get down to lessons. And there's actually a whole bunch of lessons. I think there's lesson 1 through 5. So I got, down here I'm looking at lesson 1.1. I'll have 2.1, 3.1, 4.1. There's a whole bunch of them. For our lab, what I want you to do is complete lessons 1 and 2. And that's all of lessons 1. So lesson 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and so on. And lesson 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, whatever, all the ones that are there. Just those first 2 sets of lessons. Let's look at the first one together. I'd scroll down. Now, remember, back under Ed, I didn't have arrow keys. So to move my cursor around, I had to use the keys that were on my keyboard. The H and J and K keys. Well, that still holds true. Right? So lesson 1.1 just has me moving my cursor around. I'm pressing the L key, so I'm moving to the right. I'm pressing my J key, I'm moving to the I'm moving down. H, I'm moving left. K, I'm moving up. Now Vim is improved, so in addition to these keys working, my arrow keys also work. That's something we didn't see in the original VI, but Vim does allow that. So it has you going through doing this, and really that's all there is for lesson 1, lesson 1.1. Then it has you going down to lesson 1.2, and it's got these steps on here. All you do is you follow the steps. All right, it's got to have you exit it and go back into it again. Now, for the lab, I have you taking screenshots of specific lessons, and those are specified on Blackboard. Take a screenshot, if you would please, embed them into a Word document, and submit them to this week's lab. And that wraps up our overview of Vim. Go through, complete the Vim tutor. As always, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I will see you next week.